And so in our company, we've really got two primary values, kindness and complaint free. So what would kindness do? And complaint free is, contribute, don't complain. And so what would kindness do? And it's just such a central question. Now that's only one step below. Joanne, my wife, and I met a fellow once who just smart guy, wise guy, and wise as in wisdom, not wise guy, but a wise guy.
Yeah.
And he had this question he used to ask, which was much more powerful, but less commercial. And his question simply was, what would love do?
Mm.
And so we've just crafted that into what would kindness do?
Hello, and welcome to Uncovered, the podcast with your host, Jason Irving. Join me in a journey to understand what's truly happening in your world and the world around you. This is not about how you're living life on the surface. It's about what's truly driving you from under the covers. I'm going to take you on a journey to deeply uncover the reason why you are here, the ultimate purpose in your problems, and the way that they have shaped your life up until now. See, I believe you have a purpose, and your problems are the highway towards ultimate realization of that journey towards freedom and the reconnection of your true self. I've been told I have a different spin on most things, and I'll be giving you my understanding of life, love, and what we're all here for, purpose. To get the best out of this podcast, drop what you already know so you can discover what's beyond you. So join me, let's play this game of life and bring on liberation, transformation, and change. Let's do this. Hey guys, I'm super excited. I've got an amazing man here that I asked a couple of weeks ago to get on my podcast, and he does models, and I do models all the time in the work that I do. I'm really excited to have someone of this caliber. He's looked after lots of corporations, really amazing human. So welcome, Simon, to Uncovered.
Very, very grateful, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So Simon, I'd love to get a little bit of a background story on who you are, what you're about, where you've come from, and what you do now.
Well, I'm in my 60s now, so it's been, there's a lot of story, and I'll try and be brief. But it's kind of fascinating. I think a core thing that doesn't come out in business very much, but I think it's a real core substance of who I am and some of the things that drive the way I think, is that I grew up in really small country towns around Western Australia, 400 people, 900 people, and farming communities. And, they say you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. And one of the things about country towns is they only operate if everybody pulls together. Every year, a farmer is going to lose their crop to fire. It's just going to happen, And there's two paychecks, the crop from the harvest and the wool clip, And so if a farmer loses their crop from fire, the community will look after the family until the wool clip comes in, because one day it's going to be somebody else. And at age 16, everyone's a member of the volunteer fire brigade and all this sort of thing. And my father was a senior administrator in all of these towns. He was shire clerk or town clerk or whatever. So everybody knows you. If you do the wrong thing, someone says, would your father like to find out about that? And so you pretty quickly step back into, did the right thing again. And the truth is, I had the great joy of growing up in communities where doing the right thing, because, looking after each other is actually the best thing you can do, was the reason for doing it, rather than, well, if you don't, you might get caught, right? So I just have a fundamental belief that kindness, is the fabric of a sophisticated community, because those little tiny country towns that people might have thought is not that sophisticated were very sophisticated in the social character of them. And so that plays out into business, in that I think I have an innate view that free enterprise is the most powerful force for good on the planet if it's held in the hands of the right leaders. It can do things government can't do. It can do things that not-for-profits can't do, because commercial success sustains long-term ability to deliver and perform, right?
Yeah.
And so if you've got to keep going cap in hand and asking for handouts, eventually that can come to an end. Governments have challenges that free enterprise doesn't have to deal with. And so if the right people are leading, free enterprise, it can do incredible things. And so business should be cause and commercially driven. Those two things have to happen. And so, my father was left local government, became a business owner. My mother, was a mad, crazy entrepreneur from her young adult years. And so in these country towns, she's opening alternative medicine shops and health food shops. And can you imagine in the central wheat belt in the 70s deciding to open, a Reiki and iridology center?
No way.
It's just, but she opened a health food shop doing Reiki and iridology, and she became a practitioner and everything. And people were going, what is that? And then after a while, she's doing Reiki on the show bull from a farmer. They're going to put on for a raw show because he's a bit stiff, Margaret. It's just so I had a really, and Mum would say, if I'd say, oh, I'd love a Batman costume, Mum would push me to the sewing machine and go, we'll figure it out. So my brothers and I all learned to sew. I made my wife's maternity clothes and my daughter's ball gowns because we learned to sew. Dad could weld and build with timber and everything else. And so if we wanted something, Dad would say, go down the shed and make it, and we'd make the thing. So we were always working with our hands. We were always drawing little plans sketch out the little plan on the paper first for what's the cupboard going to be that you're building or whatever, and then go down the shed and build it. And in this really nurturing community. So I had this really eclectic mix of brain to hand connection from a very young age. You want something, draw it, then build it, draw it, then make it. I didn't have the same kind of traditional boundaries around gender-based assignments in the family. Dad did a lot of cooking at home and everything else. So that, I think, affected, some of the things I think about in terms of, roles and stuff. And this community drive really shaped this view that we've all got to kind of do the very best we can for the collective. And so that set an undertone. And then I started my working life in electrics and electronics. And you can't do anything in that world if you can't read a circuit diagram, which is really a model on paper of what's happening in physics, because you can't see the physics of it. You can't see the electricity moving, right? And so I had to learn to be able to read a model on paper and draw a model on paper in order to create a circuit or diagnose and repair a circuit. And then I thought I would teach, and I went and did my Bachelor of Education, and they sent me to schools that are designed to test your vocational fortitude. And I realised I couldn't teach teenagers for the next 40 years. I had to hang out with adults. So I went back and did a Bachelor of Arts in Adult Education. My grad work was in business and commerce, and I lectured in TAFE at university for a while. And then I got heavily involved in organisational change management, worked on a project to shift the government trading, the water authority, a government utility, into a profit-generating trading enterprise, and then got into executive management, CSR building materials. And then about 25 years ago, stepped out of that into our own management consultancy, and spent that 25 years, on all sorts of projects for government, for big business, strategic planning, organizational development and change, team building, performance management, sales, development, sales performance. I became known as a facilitator of complex and contentious issues. So the government would come in and say, we're putting 200 people in a room together who are at war with each other over this issue, but they're unified in their collective dislike for us as a government. So you've got 2 hours. Can you get them to reach agreement? And I discovered that the simplest way to facilitate a contentious and complex issue is just, if you've got 2 hours, just frustrate everybody for 3/4 of the available time. And yeah, absolutely. So for 90 minutes, just frustrate everybody. What do you think? Oh, that's interesting. Let's write that down. What do you think? Completely opposite view. Well, that's interesting too, though. Let's write that down. And because if there's no tension, there's no energy to try and resolve anything. And so the number one objective when you've got a contentious issue is create enough tension for people to want to reach an agreement, as opposed to they have an energy around wanting to be in disagreement. But if you burn 90 minutes of everyone's time, they want to walk out of that room with something. They at least have a unified tension that they want to get something from having spent this last 90 minutes together. They might not have a tension around wanting to agree the issue, but they are all agreed that this guy out the front has just burnt 90 minutes of our time. And we need to walk away from here with something. And so sometimes that, and also what I would be doing was allowing them to divert their angst towards me, because I'm just burning their time now. And then I found at about the 90-minute mark in a 2-hour meeting, if I'd go up to the whiteboard and say, listen, folks, there's a lot of tension about this, but I think I could draw this. And I'd start drawing a model on the whiteboard. And literally I'd spend the first 90 minutes figuring out what the geometry is going to be.
Right.
And the first thing I'd put on the whiteboard would be the geometry: a triangle, a Venn diagram, a 2x2 matrix, a hierarchy, a series of steps, an infinity loop. I've learned to really understand geometry. I know that you really have a deep understanding of geometry, and it's I taught physics and chemistry and things like that. So my brain is partially scientific and partially creative.
Yeah.
And people underestimate how powerful geometry is. So I'm really spending the first 9 minutes figuring out the geometry, and then I'd go to the whiteboard and draw the shape of the model on the whiteboard, and then start facilitating out. So, and as soon as the geometry gives you the number of dimensions and the dynamic of the model. Like a circle is a complete thing, right? A Venn diagram is 3 parts, but you don't need all 3 parts to have some of it. Whereas a triangle is 3 dimensions, but if you lose one, the whole thing collapses. A 2x2 matrix is 2 primary dimensions that give you 4 outcomes. So I'd spend the first 90 minutes figuring out the best geometry to help this group, draw it on the whiteboard, and then facilitate out what are the dimensions, folks. Hey, listen, there's 2 axes on this 90-degree, on this 2x2 matrix. What are the 2 axes? And they'd rattle stuff off. Now, I had an idea in my head what they were going to be, but I want to get it in their words and build the model with them, because they can't disagree with what they've just built. And so we get to the end of that last 30 minutes. I go, that looks like a good place to land. And they'd all go, that's amazing. Why didn't you give us the model at the start? And I go, well, I didn't have it. You built it. And I just realized how powerful models were as first and foremost a thinking tool, a collective thinking tool. Because creativity is not done from a blank sheet of paper. Creativity is always done from a framework. Great songwriters understand the structure of music. Right? Great mathematicians like Einstein understood the fundamental framework of math. Yeah. In order to be able to then uncover the general relativity of the theory of general relativity and the formula E equals mc squared. So creativity doesn't start with a blank sheet of paper. Creativity starts from a framework that is blank. And that's a big distinction.
Yeah, okay.
And so I would give them a blank geometry and let the group create the model. And it just worked. And people would say to me, can you teach people how to facilitate? I'm going, well, it's not that special. You just frustrate everyone for 3/4 of the available time, because the 3/4 mark is a really interesting number.
Gotcha.
Most people drop out of something at the 3/4 mark.
Yeah.
And
what do you think people do, Simon? Like, what I'm hearing from you, mate, is that you grew up caring. You grew up being taught to care.
For sure. And honest.
Fundamental default is care, honesty, integrity, and a deep wanting for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, my father, when Dad died, I did the eulogy, and I'm the youngest in the family of 4, but I have 45 first cousins on Dad's side of the family.
Wow.
And all in the country, right? And I was going to do the eulogy, and I had this thought, and I had to check with my brothers, my sister, and my mother, and then I started checking with some cousins, because I thought that can't be right. But I had this realization that I didn't remember Dad ever getting angry with me, ever.
Wow.
And so I went to my brothers and my cousins, and none of them could either. And my mother said, no, your father never ever got angry with me. Like, if we didn't agree on something, he would just say, I don't want to get angry, Margaret. And my cousins had also said, not only did your father never get angry with me, Dad was the second youngest of 10. And as his siblings all died, Dad would started ringing all my cousins once a month just to see how they're all going, and we're all in our 50s and 60s. And so at the eulogy, I was able to say, look, I can't remember Dad ever getting angry with me. And he's the most honest person I'd ever know. I remember finding a $20 note on the floor of a petrol station once as a kid. We'd gone in and we're walking out. I found this $20 note. And I said, Dad, look what I found. He said, give it to the lady at the counter. And I said, oh, she'll just keep it. And he said, but that's for her to deal with. That's not your $20. What if somebody comes back in and says, I dropped $20 here?
I love that.
And,
I remember one time I went and got some chips from the shops one day, a bag of chips, and I had my 20s. That was when they were 20 cents back then. And I had them, had the 20 cents in my pocket still. And I was so scared. I ran up to the shops and snuck back in and put the chip packet back down and put it back up again, and then went and paid for it. So I'd done the wrong thing. And most people would have gone, I scored a packet of chips. And I love the fact that you've got this sort of attitude, Simon, where it's, doing the right thing first. It's not a common attribute. And it sounds like you've been taught that as well by your dad and your mum.
Well, certainly by example, right? And I realize now, as as an older person, and with adult daughters and things, and obviously we did the same thing with our girls, but you realize once you have your own children, it was really deliberate, by mum and dad. It wasn't just an example. I mean, the questions Dad used to ask and things. I can remember I used to play hockey, and I played for Western Australia, and I was living in the country at the time. Still, I didn't leave the country until I was probably 22 or something. So I was driving backwards and forwards to Perth twice a week for training and for the club, and then a third time for the state team, and then coming down on the weekends for games. So I was on the road all the time. It's about an hour and a half drive, right, each way. And, I was young, and, I got caught for speeding quite a few times. And, we have demerit points. And if you use all 12, you lose your license for 3 months, right? And I can remember coming, and Dad knew everyone in the country. You were in someone like Dad, everybody, right? Anyway, I remember coming home one day, and this is the most anger I ever saw expressed from Dad, right? So I'd been pulled over for doing 15 kilometers over the speed limit. I was doing 105 kilometers an hour in a 90 zone.
Yeah.
Out of a country town that I'd just driven through, right? And before it got back up to full highway speed, it was at 90, and it was going to go 110. I was doing 105 still inside the 90 zone, which is like 2 points off your demerit, off your license, and a fine and everything. And I got home and I didn't say anything, and I thought I had 4 points left. I'll still have 2 points left after that, because I'd used up 8 already in other speeding fines. And anyway, the next afternoon, I went to work, and then the next afternoon we're at home, and Dad said, "Hey, listen, son, if you were caught speeding through Baker's Hill, I don't know, let's say you're doing 105 in a 90 zone, what would that be? That'd be 2 points. You've got 4 left. You'd have 2 left, wouldn't you?" And I'm going, yeah. And he goes, "Well, you need to know, if that happened and then you lost the last 2, your mother and I are not driving you to Perth for hockey training. So you wouldn't be able to play, right? And you'd have to let's say you did get picked up doing 105 through a 90 zone and you lost those 2 points, you'd have to drive without any errors for 3 years until you got some points back." So, I don't and hockey is really important to you. So, and you'd tell me, wouldn't you, anyway? Of course, what would be better, right? Someone saying, "I can't believe you did this," or that. Yeah, I've never forgotten. And I just fell apart and went, oh, sorry, Dad, like I can't, I was tired, it was late, it was 9 o'clock at night, I'd been to training. He goes, yeah, but we're not driving you to Perth for training. So you're going to have to drive impeccably for 3 years. Now that changed my driving habits, I didn't speed anymore. But what's more powerful, that and I realized only later in life, like once we had our own children, that was a kindness-driven way of executing discipline.
Yeah.
As opposed to an ego-driven. The opposite of kindness is not nastiness. The opposite of kindness is ego.
I love that.
And so if he'd gotten angry, that's his ego in play.
Yeah.
But he wasn't angry. He was kind. He's going, hockey is way too important to you, and you play for the state. And if you can't go to training, you can't be in the state team, and you can't play for the club team in Perth, which at the time was the best first division competition in Australia. We had the first synthetic surface, hockey surface in Australia, in Perth, and international players were coming to Perth to play, English players and Indian players. Everyone playing in the first division in Perth was in a national or state team. That was a really high-class competition. And he's going, if you can't drive to Perth, you can't play. And he's really saying, don't lose those last 2 points, because we are not driving you to Perth because you've lost 12 points through various speeding fines. It would have been a lot easier for him to go, I can't believe you did this.
Yeah, yeah.
And go off his head. But that would have been ego. The opposite of kindness is not nastiness, it's ego. And,
I love that.
So our company values, we only have two. We're a kindness-driven and complaint-free company. And we wear these wristbands. If you go to acomplaintfreeworld.org, the idea is you run a 21-day complaint-free challenge. And so you put the wristband on.
Yeah.
And then you've got to go 21 days without complaining. And it's only a complaint if it comes out of your mouth, right?
Okay.
So it's a complaint if it affects other people. If you think it, no problem. But if it affects other people, in other words, it comes out of your mouth, it's a complaint. Yeah. And if you complain, you've got to start the 21 days again. Swap wrists. So there's a physical action, and start the 21 days again. And the first time I did this, I was going to be facilitating some conflict issues with an executive team. And it was really problematic. And I thought, I've got to have something. I was going to spend 3 days in a residential environment with them to get this sorted. And I thought, I've got to have something to default to when they are ramping.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd found this 21-day complaint-free challenge. And so at the start of the 3 days, I said, before we get started, I want to invite everybody into this 21-day complaint-free challenge. And they all did it, and I had wristbands for them and everything. And I always have a few hundred of these wristbands in my drawer. And I initially thought, I'm a pretty positive person. This shouldn't be too hard. But it took me 8 months to get to my first 21 days.
Mm.
And the first thing you realize, there's two things that happen. The first thing you realize is you complain way more than you think.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, by the time you hit about, and it's way harder than you think, and then by the time you hit about day 15, the world is actually quite a different place. And so I caught us as a company one day talking about a particular client in not very kind ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, a client that had been quite difficult to handle and everything else. And I pondered on that. And so then I got the team together again. I said, I'm not, I don't ever want us here talking about, I don't ever want to hear us talking about a client like that again, privately amongst ourselves. And I don't want to hear anyone inside the company talking about anyone like that again. We're a complaint-free company. And I'd love us all to go on the complaint-free challenge, and told it what it was, and they all got into it.
Yeah, wow.
And, so on a Monday morning, often on Voxer, someone would jump into our Voxer chat and go, okay, I'm back on day one. But, and then that turned into this idea of what would it be if you're a kindness-driven company?
Yeah.
And there's one question that I use a lot, when you're confronted with something. And I think my father used to ask this without consciously realizing it, or maybe he really did realize it and he just never told me. But the question is, so someone does something a customer complains, blah, 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 and they do it in a passive aggressive way.
Yeah.
And the ego response is that we're going to go back at you and tell you you're wrong, because ego wants to win.
Yeah.
The better question is, what would kindness do? Kindness, pardon?
I love this.
What would kindness do?
Yeah. What would kindness do?
Kindness would assume that there's something going on for that guy. And
Yeah.
we can at least be the people today that understand that.
Yeah.
So let's just find out what he needs from us. And anyway, he's not totally wrong. Maybe it is hard to find that resource or whatever. And so in our company, we've really got two primary values, kindness and complaint free. So what would kindness do? And complaint free is, contribute, don't complain. And so what would kindness do? And complain, it's just such a central question. Now that's only one step below. Joanne, my wife, and I met a fellow once who just smart guy, wise guy, and wise as in wisdom, not wise guy, but a wise guy.
Yeah.
And he had this question he used to ask, which was much more powerful, but less commercial. And his question simply was, what would love do?
Mm.
And so we've just crafted that into what would kindness do? And I just find that steers me through life in a pretty pleasant way. It's and so somebody does something, and somebody, someone does something, someone speaks angry to me or aggressively or whatever. I can either argue back, but war only ever leads to loss of life. Or I can, in that moment, really quickly ask myself, what would kindness do? And it's almost always the case that kindness challenges you to understand what's going on for that person. The answer is almost always find out what's going on for them. What would kindness do? Find out what's going on for them. Which means you get to have a deeper conversation with people. Mm. It also means they feel safer with you.
100%.
And there are three things that people want when they're a customer. There's really only three things that everybody wants. We want to be really deeply understood. We want to meet someone who truly gets us.
Yeah.
We want to be made safe. And then the third thing is something that no one wants to admit to, but we all want to win.
Yeah.
We want to have a better car, a bigger house, a better solution. And so if you show up with this thing of what would kindness do, you're going to tick all three boxes.
Yeah.
In that one kind of way of thinking. So none of that's to do with models, but a lot of it's got to do with why I'm willing to spend the time in the conversation that I am with people, Yeah. And then sometimes people say, oh, yeah, but doesn't that mean people are going to walk all over you? Only if I interpret it that way.
This is what I really love right now, guys. Listen to this, because I've put a big harp into our academy to say, I want kind people coming first in this world. Now, you're a successful businessman, Simon. You're actually showing and leading a very important, that's beyond models, beyond what you actually share with your business strategies to help people improve their businesses and become successful. We're talking about something that is fundamentally principled in the human nature of our existence.
Yeah.
And I would love to ask you this, Simon, kindness is your weapon, and it's not a weakness that a lot of people feel like they're going to get trampled over. How have you managed to not get trampled over and share kindness in a way that allows you to hold true to your integrity?
So that's a really great question, but it's a really great question, but I know that the immediate answer is I just don't engage with or spend time with people that are going to trample over me.
Okay.
I've got so we filter really fast.
Gotcha.
So you can't be a client of mine if you're not going to behave well. If someone says to me, Simon, I really want to use your models because I'll absolutely be able to, some of the language people use around selling is appalling.
I agree.
I'll absolutely be able to, ground the conversions out. I go, I don't think we're a fit. What do you mean? Just the way you spoke then, if someone calls I don't like we have to use it because the market, sometimes it's the only word the market understands, but I hate the notion of a lead.
Oh, me too. It pisses me off.
How about they're a person?
Yeah, me too. You're right, talking in the same language. I hated that when I heard that the first time. I was like, I didn't even know what a lead was when I got into this business coaching thing. I didn't know what it was because I was like, aren't they people? Aren't they with a heartbeat, not a number?
Yeah. Well, the motor industry, and I've done a lot of work in the motor industry, is they call them heads. And there's a great movie that the motor industry used to use a scene from to train salespeople. And the sales manager has got all these salespeople in the room. He's saying, right, there's $50 for anyone that goes out and puts their foot on. Every day there are $100 notes floating around out in the forecourt, and there's an extra $100 for anyone that goes out and puts their foot on it. And he's talking about $100 note is a head, is a prospect,
right?
And anyone that goes and puts their foot on the prospect and pins them down, I'm going to give them an extra $100. I'm going, that is appalling, right?
Yeah.
And so we filter really fast. So if someone shows up for us and they look like because we have a very, very strong belief about pressure-free, transparent selling. So one of the things that drives the reason why we use models is that if business is the most powerful force for good on the planet in the hands of the right leaders, then selling should be the most noble thing we do.
I love that.
Because you only get to deliver this timeless and transformational solution to your client once you've sold to them. So I talk to doctors and clinicians and functional health specialists, and the sale is the first step in the healing process. Until you've actually made the sale on, you need this surgery, you need this treatment, you need this medicine, you need this protocol, until you actually make the sale and the patient says, yes, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do everything you asked me to do, the healing won't work, right? So this selling should be the most noble thing that we do. And so selling should be pressure-free and transparent. There shouldn't be any surprises for the customer. And yet most customers come to a buying process with suspicion.
Yeah, naturally, because we've been told so many times. It's like a force ring your arm and twist it, and then put you in so much pain that you're going to have to impulsively say yes to the person selling to you.
Pain aggravate, right? Pain aggravate solve. And it's the 50s and 60s foot in the door sales strategy, where door-to-door vacuum salespeople used to buy shoes where the sole of the shoe was wider than the actual foot of the shoe, and they were leather. And so they'd get the door would open and they'd put their foot in the door, and then the little woman of the house, which is why they were there during the day, because the man of the house was out, quote unquote, the little woman of the house is shutting the door on them, and they have their foot in the door, and it keeps hitting the sole of the shoe so it doesn't hurt their foot, and they can keep shouting their pitch through the door, right? That's where foot in the door sales came from.
Right.
Think about that. I mean, are you kidding me, right? So this idea that we should be so much better than we are at so many things, and but if we come at it from just a recognition that the other person matters, it seems to work out. So we filter out really fast.
Okay.
And what's interesting to me is, and it's a secret that you probably don't realize until you really double down on this stuff. I have more people protecting me in the world than working against me. I have people reaching out all the time saying, do you know so-and-so is teaching your material? Like, oh, it's interesting. Yeah. Thanks for that. I have people jumping into Facebook groups when somebody, puts some of my IP out without attributing it. And I've got people who jump into the Facebook group and go, that looks like Simon Bowen's model. You should attribute it. There's thousands of people around the world who are watching out for me. And the amount of feedback that we get from people is, I bought from you because of humility, and who you are, not because of the models.
Yeah, and that's what I look for, Simon. I'm always looking for the person, and I've been disappointed a lot of the time with human nature and the people behind the cell, because you're always looking for, listeners, a person like Simon. I've known Simon over a number of years, and I've been in some of your seminars where you've spoken about your models method and what you do, and I always am looking at the human behind anything that anybody does. And listeners, this guy is the real deal. He's not a faker. He just cares. And what I'm hearing is a person who likes to do what's right rather than be right, and share a way that actually is elegantly communicating an offer to help people become more able. Am I correct?
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing is, if you take a stand on this stuff, it forces you to be better at how you communicate and sell anyway. Because you're not going to rely on the gift of the gab. You're not going to rely on false statements and crappy evidence and things like that. And you want your client testimonials to be real, and it forces you to be better. And a really interesting thing, look at tennis. Now, a lot of people, whether they play tennis or not, but tennis is one sport where most people understand who the people are, right? And you and I know that there's an Australian player at the moment who's, by all measure, a phenomenally talented tennis player who's just an angry ant.
Yeah, he's not a very popular person in my heart because of the attitude and the way he approaches.
Yeah, and I suspect he's not a popular person with a lot of people. Now, he thinks he's red hot, but he's only inside the top 50. He's not inside the top 10.
Yeah.
There's also been 3 players at the top of the world in tennis for the better part of 20 years: Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic, right?
Yeah.
Why is Federer so loved?
Because he's like you.
He's a great tennis player, right? But he's a better human being.
Yeah.
And Nadal is the same. And Federer is not the greatest tennis player in history anymore.
No.
But everyone's going to say he is. Because they want him to be.
Yeah, everyone wants him to be by far the best.
Forever, right? They want him to be.
Yeah.
And if not him, then Nadal. Now, I'm not passing judgment on Djokovic, but they are openly, they're humble, they're kind, they're grateful and appreciative, and people want them to be the greatest player to have ever played because of who they are as humans, not what they are as players. And I think we get things backwards a little bit. I think we take our identity by what we are rather than who we are.
100%.
And, you say to somebody, "Oh, what do you do?" They go, "Oh, I'm the CEO of a large company. I'm an engineer. I'm a doctor. No, I mean, like, what do you do?" "Oh, I'm a father. I'm a community member."
Yeah.
We define ourselves by our job title. And the problem is the job title is often nothing more than a description of the primary activity of the work. I'm an accountant. I count things. I'm a project manager. I'm a bookkeeper. I'm a surgeon. I do surgery. And so most people's professional title is meaningless. It's not a statement of value at all. It's a statement of activity.
Yeah, I love that.
So if you said to a surgeon, "What do you do?" it would be more accurate for them to say, "I save lives." But they don't. They say, "I'm a surgeon."
Yeah.
And so you say, "What do you do?" "I'm a surgeon." No one's going to go, "Why did you become a surgeon?" But if you say to somebody, "What do you do?" they go, "I save lives." Everyone's going to go, "What do you mean?" "Well, I do brain surgery." "Why did you say you save lives?" "Well, that's because that's why I got into it." Now it's a whole other conversation, but we don't talk like that. We don't think like that. It's the uncommon thinking, and it should be common.
100%. Now, I want to ask you a question around what specifically you do. We're going to go into activity right now.
Yeah.
So we know, and this is why I was so excited to talk to you, Simon, because I knew our conversation was going to be like this. It was going to be really meaning driven, rather than, hey, here's a few things that you do. I wanted to know the type of person, and I wanted listeners to get the opportunity to get who Simon is. And I think we've got a really good understanding. Tell us about what the models do, because I know from talking to you around what the brain mechanism does when you draw something out freehand, and you provide that inspiration after that, an hour and a half of getting everyone a little bit tense, and then you go in and create peace. What happens when you bring something to the table from a model perspective? What happens to us as humans?
So only about 11% of the information that the brain processes about the world around us comes through the auditory channel, and 83% comes through the optic nerve.
Yeah.
And 55% of the brain's reflex function is attached directly to the optic nerve. So when an animal hears a sound, it goes on alert.
Yeah.
But then it only runs or turns to fight or flight when it sees the danger. And so when we hear things, it triggers almost a logical mechanism.
Yeah.
But when we see things, we feel it. And so if you imagine, remember when that soccer team was stuck in the cave in Thailand? That team of first of all, we all only heard about that being read out on the news or on the radio, right? There was no visual. And I don't know about you, but I heard this story saying, a youth soccer team stuck in a cave in Thailand, and the cave is flooding and they can't get out. And I remember thinking to myself, well, you walked in there, guys, walk out before the flood water gets too high. Like, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Logic.
But then I saw the graphic of the cave going up and down and everything else, and I thought, okay, this is really bad. You feel it, right? So when we gather information visually, it's richer. It has nuance that can't be expressed in words. This is the problem. The auditory channel for human communication is limited by language, and language is linear and limited.
Yeah.
And so when we see things, there's nuances in that we don't have to have words for. And we feel so much more of it. And the number one tool for success in life is your ability to communicate effectively with other people.
Yeah.
And so, the great leaders are great orators. They paint pictures. I'm fascinated with speeches. Think about Martin Luther King's speech. That was a visual done in words. The rolling hills of Mississippi. I have a dream that, one day we'll see all children playing together on the rolling hills of Mississippi and all sort of stuff. He painted a picture, right? And so when we shift to visual for people, we open up channels into the brain that aren't accessible when we're just speaking or using written word, because the written word, people just read it to themselves. And even though they're looking at it, it turns into an auditory pattern inside the brain.
Yeah.
They're just seeing words, they're not seeing an image, right? So it's still limited and linear by language. So success primarily relies on your ability to communicate. The two most important systems in business, but maybe the two most important systems in life, are the system for thinking and the system for influence. A business is only as good as the idea on which it's built. You are as good as the thinking that you bring to the table, and then the ability to influence other people to agree with you, to come alongside you.
Yeah.
And so if we can control the system for thinking and the system for influence, most things take place. And I started looking for, what's the mechanism? What is that system? And then I realized the language of the sage, the system for thinking and influence, is the ability to communicate visually through models. Because it gives people two things. Not only does it give them visual access to the idea, but it gives them a very important second part, which everyone's looking for. It gives them structural access to the idea. Oh, this is organized. So this is not just some intuitive genius that you've got. This is quite organized genius. So when people are buying, they want to know two things. Will this work, and will it work for me?
Yep.
And so the structural access says to them, this thing works. And if you've done it with a lot of other people, then it should work for me if I do the right thing. And so this issue that a lot of people have had is, yeah, we can promise results, but the customer's got to do their bit. It's so much easier to have as a conversation when there's a model that captures what you do, a visual model, a framework, right? And so the two things, visual access and structural access, give people two things. The visual access brings this feeling and lets people think, oh, you understand me. Like your model's mapped out most of the scenarios. You really get this. And then the structural access makes people feel safe. Remember what I was saying before, people want to feel understood and they want to be safe. Oh, this framework makes me safe because it's structured and organized. So there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on, but effectively what we're saying is the model acts as a blueprint for the brain that sits between the metaphysics of the idea and the reality of the idea. So everything that you and I are using right now, these computer screens, the desks we're sitting at, we're all just an idea at one point. And the metaphysical transition of an idea in the ether into a reality in our human world, the first physical appearance of an idea is usually a drawing on paper.
Yeah, sure
or
is.
a drawing on a computer now, right?
Yeah.
The first physical appearance of an idea is usually a drawing. And so I kind of pondered, how do I capture genius and create, how do I create a blueprint for genius? And so I built the genius model. And then that spawned a whole lot of thinking about other models. The genius model was about an 8-year build, quite frankly. And fundamentally, now you and I have chatted before, about the tetrahedrons and things like that. So I know that you get this stuff. So I'm really happy to have this conversation. But, if the moment you start thinking about how do I create a blueprint for genius that can be communicated as a blueprint, like a blueprint for the brain that sits between the big idea and reality, you start to get an interesting thought pattern occurring. And so, there's lots of different shapes that I use until I settled on the geometry that we've got at the moment. We tested a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, it's not an accidental model. There's a lot of stuff hidden inside it that I don't ever explain to people because it's not necessary and it would just confuse things. People just need to know, a lot of people just want to have one and know how to use it.
Yeah.
But what we're doing with the models, with the visual models, is taking complex conversations and giving people a blueprint for the brain that they can sit in between their idea and the client or the team members' understanding of that to bring it into reality. Now, the first time something reaches reality is when two people agree to it. It doesn't reach reality when it's a physical computer sitting on a desk.
Mm.
It reaches reality when we've all agreed that's how we're going to build it. That's when it hits reality.
Yeah.
Now we'll build it. So to reach reality, which is we agree on this, we need a blueprint that we work on together. And then when we get the blueprint agreed, we agree to the blueprint. We've just agreed to the reality of that monitor that we're going to build together. And the same is in sales. We sell the model first. And when we sell the model and people reach agreement on it, that sale now has reached reality. All you're left with is a commercial conversation. How much is that going to cost?
I love this. Now, listeners, this is a guy that I really implore you to get in touch with and get an opportunity to get his magic, because it's not only what he has is he's a genius, in my opinion. This is what I see you as. I've heard you speak so many times, and my brain always goes bang every time I get to talk to you. All my hairs stand on end the way that you talk, the way that you communicate, and the delivery that comes forward. So listeners, I'd love the opportunity, if you want to get an opportunity to catch up with Simon, find out what he does. I'll give you all the information on the show notes so you can, you can jump in and find out what Simon does and how he does it. If you like this podcast, I'd love it if you could like and review and share it so people have an opportunity to understand how to sell in business, how to be a really good human and do the right thing by people, and understand that kindness is a measure that is quantifiable. And this is what Simon is actually really sharing today, is that kindness can win. And this is what I really implore, especially the Academy members who listen to this. He's the success-driven model of kindness and giving an opportunity for humanitarian leadership to come to the fore in a world that's actually not so great with that at this time. So thank you, Simon, so much for jumping on this podcast with me today.
Absolute pleasure. It's been great fun and not what I usually get to talk about. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, a little bit different today.
A little bit different. Yeah, it's good.
Thanks so much for listening to our podcast. We really appreciate you and we really appreciate your time, because time is so valuable. What we'd love you guys to do, if you like this podcast, if you could share it with your friends, and also our website address for the podcast is www.wellnessbreakthroughacademypodcast.com. Our website is www.wellnessbreakthroughacademy.com. We have a free Facebook group called Wellness Leadership Evolution, so search for that. I'd love it if you could add me as a friend on Facebook. I don't buy it, so add me as a friend. And if you want some help and you would really like some support from us in the Academy, jump in. We have a process. You can do a break-in call to connect in with us. We do small courses. We have lots of things that we share. So we'd love the opportunity to give you a chance to change your life and turn it into a free one. You are one transformation away from change. Come and catch up.